across the fence, the calendar says spring, but now's the time to think about growing your own great pumpkin. And we've got just the program to help kids all across the state grow pumpkins and win prizes. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. If you'd like to grow the great pumpkin this year, then you'll want to hear about a pumpkin growing trial being sponsored by the UVM Extension 4-H program. Joining me is 4-H educator Martha Manning. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So what is the 4-H pumpkin trial?
The Vermont 4-H Pumpkin Trial is a gardening contest for youth ages 8 through 18 who reside in Vermont. And each youth will receive a mystery packet of seeds that they will plant and care for throughout the growing season. And in the fall, on October 11th, they will bring their pumpkins in to several sites throughout the state for an official weigh-in to see who has grown the heaviest pumpkins.
And so tell me a little bit about the seeds that people are going to be getting.
I've selected 2 varieties of seeds that the youth will grow. Both are what are called giant pumpkins, and those are pumpkins that mature at over 50 pounds. They're not the enormous pumpkins that you see at the fair, and by maturing at between 50 to 130 pounds, youth and families should be able to get them to the weigh-ins with minimal difficulty.
Because it would be a real problem if you had an 800-pounder that you'd have to transport.
Yes, because those you have to have a tripod and a pickup and all kinds of fancy equipment. These should be easily transported in your personal family car.
What are the rules?
There really are no specific rules. Youth may choose to either plant their seeds indoors in peat pots, or they can wait till later in the spring as the soil warms up and direct sow into their pumpkin patch. They can add fertilizers or compost or anything they choose during the growing season, and this allows us to see how these pumpkins will perform under a wide variety of growing conditions. It also is an opportunity for the youth to really experience the learning by doing model that is important to the 4-H program.
Right, because unless you do it yourself and realize, well, how deep do I have to plant these? How many can I plant in one area? You know, you just wouldn't absorb that information.
Right, that's correct.
Talk a little bit about the importance of getting kids' hands in the dirt and sort of the magic that takes place when you see something that you've planted grow to be such a massive plant.
Well, I think it's important that this is like the first step for youth to connect to where their food comes from. It lets them experience the magic of putting the seed into the soil, waiting for those first leaves to pop through the soil, and the responsibility of having to care for the plant. You know, how important it is to keep the weeds out of your pumpkin patch, to be observant of how the fruit will develop on that plant. And for some people it may mean, you know, if you want that really huge pumpkin, you've got to pick off some of those initial fruits. And for some kids that can be hard because they want all the pumpkins they can get. Right. But it's the responsibility of caring for the plant, taking ownership of the plants and watering them and weeding them and watching for pests.
Yeah, pests are a big deal because that's always the problem I've had in a pumpkin patch is just any number of pests.
Well, and I think that's important for youth to be able to just go out and make those observations, share those observations with other kids, and know how they can deal with those pests.
Talk a little bit about that sharing of information because that's a whole component, too, of this project.
The Vermont Pumpkin Trial has a Facebook page, and we're going to encourage youth to use that Facebook page to communicate what are they seeing in their pumpkin patch. Are they having problems? And maybe other youth can comment on how they have experienced those same problems and how they have overcome those problems. For those families who may not have computer access, we will be doing periodic newsletters that we will mail to their houses, and that's important to keep everybody connected throughout the process.
Do you have to have a lot of land to do this?
No, but pumpkins are pretty, the vines spread quite a distance, so I don't think you need a huge area, but you do have to take into consideration that the vines are going to spread throughout the year at the growing season, and you know, they may end up all over your backyard, but that's okay.
And about how many pumpkins will the kids seed, do you think, on average?
Well, we are giving each of the participants 10 seeds, and depending whether they pick off some of those early fruits, you know, they may see 10, they may seed 20 pumpkins. It really will vary on the growing conditions and the care that they've provided for them.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, pollination is a big issue. Maybe some kids will research that a little bit and maybe plant some flowers to encourage bees.
Right. And some may have, beehives in their neighborhood. So for those kids who really want to take it a step further, they can learn about pollinators and what it takes for those plants to pollinate. Some may even experiment with pollinating their pumpkins with a paintbrush.
Well, there you go. Now, if someone's interested in joining, what can they do?
If someone is interested in joining, they can register with me through UVM Extension, and they can send an email to martha.manning@uvm.edu, or give us a call at the 800 number, which is 1-800-639-2130.
And when will the kids get their seeds?
The first participants will receive their seeds in about a week. They have up until April 15th to register, and those who register closer to the 15th will receive them as soon as we get their registrations.
And is there some support for first-time gardeners? You don't have to be an expert to do this.
No, we're hoping that we can support them through the Facebook page, and that we can also link them with other families who have more experience gardening.
And so how many people have registered so far? Because this was a surprise to you.
Currently, we have about 200. I initially was hoping for maybe 40. We have youth who are registered from Brattleboro to BB Plains, from Grand Isle to St. Johnsbury.
So all across the state?
All across the state.
And once again, the number for people to call if they're interested in participating?
1-800-639-2130.
Well, Martha, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. In our next segment, it also involves hands-on learning and discovery, this time in the forest. For a class at UVM, the forest is the classroom. Each fall, students head into the woods to learn about some unique forest dwellers. Across the fences, Rebecca Gollin tells us more.
Where you find one, ordinarily you'll find a large number of them like this.
Students from the University of Vermont are spending time in the woods. Like many Vermonters, they're learning the fine points of hunting. Ooh. If they're lucky, they might even go home with something to put on their dinner table tonight.
I think people understand that it's a living creature, and that it follows some of the rules of living things that they're familiar with, but breaks other of those rules.
These students aren't hunting fauna, or even flora for that matter. Their prey is in a kingdom all its own. They're on the prowl for fungi.
If you find edibles at school, I find it personally a thrill to find deadly ones. Just go like, ooh.
It is a little brown mushroom, or an LBM we call them sometimes, and it looks sort of inviting in a certain way, but this has the deadly amatoxins that will destroy, organs, your liver and your kidney. I always teach people the poisonous mushrooms before I start to teach them the edible ones.
Terry Delaney teaches this class on mycology, which is the study of fungi. He says even students who are initially drawn by the prospect of edible mushrooms are fascinated by the incredibly complex diversity of the organism.
They recycle carbon from fallen trees and other material, leaves. And without fungi, all this carbon would pile up. But the fungi play a critical role in liberating that fixed carbon into the soil, which can then be utilized by plants that come along later. In fact, about 80% of plants rely on partnerships with fungi.
The class is a combination of lectures and foraging expeditions, and time in the lab to examine and identify what was found. Although many students do enjoy finding the edibles, the focus of the class is on biology and the role of various fungi in the ecosystem.
They don't photosynthesize, they don't act like plants in a lot of ways, but people think of them as plants. So the mystery of not understanding how they work, I think, plays into their interest in culture.
One of the coolest things about mushrooms is each one can have a lot of different purposes, and there's so much diversity in it. It's like one you can use, like you can draw on it, like the artist conch that we saw, or you can use the shaggy mane to draw with, or some mushrooms you use to like start fires. There's all sorts of different uses for them.
What's so fun about studying mycology is mushrooms come in all shapes and sizes, and they're everywhere in nature.
Ann Hazelrig runs the UVM Plant Diagnostic Clinic, where she helps commercial growers and home gardeners identify and manage insects and disease. Many of these diseases are caused by fungi.
Winter oyster, we've got the luminescent pinellus.
I think mushrooms are fascinating. Mycology is fascinating because we encounter them in all parts of our lives. We eat them. They're in our breads. They cause our breads to rise and beer to ferment, and they're used in drugs, you know, helpful drugs, and cause plant diseases. So they're fascinating organism.
Hazelrig is taking the class to learn more about the disease side of the organism, and also to get more familiar with identifying fungi in general, including the mushroom she found on the way to this interview. What's this one that you have here?
Well, I don't know. I just found it. It was growing in mulch, and I have no idea what it is. So I'll take it up to the lab, and I'll get a spore print and take a look at the spores and try to go through a key to figure it out.
I feel like mushrooms don't always get the respect they deserve.
Carrie Oster is a self-professed mushroom nerd who joined a local mycology society when she was in high school. Now that she's a plant biology major at UVM, learning more about how fungi fit into the forest ecosystem will help her understand what's going on.
There's a lot of variations on this in terms of size and dimensions. And
So you can learn, like, oh, this mushroom is growing on this tree, but this kind of mushroom only infects already dead woods, so you know that the mushroom didn't cause the tree to die. Or just when you find a log that's on the ground and some of the shelf fungi are growing at 90-degree angles to each other, you can kind of tell by the mushrooms when the tree fell over.
It's a lot of fun too when you get out in the forest and you start to notice these things. Often you'll sit down and start to look at a mushroom that you just discovered, and after immersing yourself into the environment for a minute or two, you realize there's 2 or 3 others within arm's reach.
It's certainly not too hard to find several species of fungi within arm's reach. While there are about 10,000 named species of mushrooms, scientists estimate that 80 to 90% of all the fungi on Earth have not yet been named or described by science.
And even locally, no doubt there are some undescribed species, but locally we certainly have many thousands of species of mushrooms that could be found. And I would say that just estimating there are several hundred that are common. This semester I've seen several hundred for sure.
The abundance of species can be seen back at the lab with the wide variety of mushrooms the students have gathered.
I found some oyster mushrooms, also the winter oyster, some amanita mushrooms.
I found a winter oyster, and that's the only one that I know what it is yet. But the rest of these we're going to be IDing microscopically by looking at the spores, and also by going through the keys and looking at the macroscopic features.
The students will each gather and identify a collection of about 15 different fungi. That will involve spending some time in the lab looking closely at identifying features.
So what is it that you're looking at under the microscope?
A few things. Most importantly for identifying the mushrooms, it seems to be the spores seem to have the most characteristics, and that seems to be the end-all for what something is if you look at its spore and its characteristics, that can make or break your ID.
Well, it's not edible, but it's spectacular. Usually you find it way high up in a tree. So
Several businesses around the state are cultivating edible mushrooms, and the popularity of local food has led to an increase in foraging. Delaney says that all of the attention just adds to the interest in fungi, which can lead to fruitful results.
You could study fungi for a lifetime and still be learning things at the end of your lifetime.
Ann Hazelrig says the class has expanded her appreciation for the subject.
I find that, whether I'm on a run or walking in the woods, I'm always kind of looking down to see what I see, and that's fun. So it's a way to connect with nature, I think. So it will be a lifelong learning thing for me.
I saw an off-color brown in here.
From the woods to the lab, these UVM students are in search of answers. With its many mysteries, the complex world of fungi will be worthy of pursuit for years to come. In Burlington, I'm Rebecca Gollin with Across the Fence.
Yep, no problem. And that's our program for today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence. Bye.